Hello, podcast listeners. You are now listening to the Coffee, Health, and Science podcast. I'm your host, Jordan River, and I want to thank you for tuning in today. Before we get started, please share the Coffee, Health, and Science podcast with a friend, with a peer, with a colleague. We always appreciate the show growing grassroots style. And make sure you're subscribed. Give us a good rating and review. It really helps us out. Maybe more than you might think. Appreciate you guys. Today we have coffee news. That's right. Dr. Coffee is back on the line. How's it going, Dr. Coffee?
It's another day above ground drinking coffee, my friend. Nothing gets better than that.
My friend, I've got a mug right in front of me, and I am enjoying it thoroughly. And you know, these coffee news episodes I particularly enjoy. I didn't think I was going to enjoy them as much as I am, Dr. Coffee. Let me put it that way. There's so much interesting stuff going on. This Google alert for coffee that I signed up for is blowing up all the time. And the articles we have picked out are rather fascinating for today's episode, right, Dr. Coffee?
They are. They are. We've got about 6 things to go over today, so it should be fun.
Yeah. First of all, the first one I want to touch on is a little bit of a callback to the last coffee news episode. If you are a fan of the show and you listened to the last episode about coffee news, we touched on Kona coffee deception. For those of you who didn't hear that, Kona coffee is a Hawaiian coffee, and there was an article exposing how much of coffee is labeled as Kona coffee, but can contain as little as 10% in the actual blend. Well, I'm looking at an article right now from Civil Beat that says Hawaii lawmakers are showing a little love for Kona coffee. And this is exactly what we talked about, Dr. Coffee. The legislation in Hawaii is pushing a bill that would require coffees to have 51% or more of their coffee be from the region that they are labeling on their bag. So if you say your coffee is Kona, it's got to be at least 51% Kona coffee. And while this bill has failed in the past, many representatives are saying now is the right time. There's a lot of sense that this is the year it's going to pass, that it's going to move. What do you think about this, Dr. Steve? This is just what we were talking about.
It is just what we were talking about, and you know, not that I had anything to do with it, but I have written like 3 million billion emails. I mean, I blow up the state rep Cregan all the time.
That's who said that quote I just read. That's funny, Cregan. Yeah.
Oh, really? So, you know, we've been yelling about this for years now because I love Kona coffee. I think it's a great tasting coffee. And you can go in and see Kona Blend, and Kona Blend, it only has to be 10% Kona.
Legally right now.
And so that's just poor advertising. Plus, it doesn't really protect the brand for Hawaii. You know, we talked I think we talked about what Modi was doing with yoga in India. If it wasn't you, it was somebody else I was talking with, where they're trying to make yoga the brand for India. The same thing is for Kona coffee,
right?
And Hawaii. It's got to be the brand, and so they've put in 2 bills, not one. House Bill 1886 and House Bill 1897 are moving through the legislature to say that coffee has to be 51% from the region.
That's right. One bill is for roasted coffee and the other is for refrigerated coffees and things like that. That's right. 2 bills. I'm glad that they're tightening down on this. And that's exactly right, Dr. Steve. It's really interesting. This article says if you take a look at some other staple commodities, like, for instance, Vermont maple syrup. Vermont maple syrup has to be 100% produced in Vermont. Idaho potatoes have to be grown in Idaho. Wisconsin cheese has to be made in Wisconsin. But as of right now, Kona coffee doesn't have those same standards.
And don't forget Vidalia onions.
Right. Yes, precisely. Yeah.
You know, it goes back even to the days of wine where Bordeaux has to be grown in the Bordeaux region. So right. I think it's really sad that that Kona hasn't gotten its due. So I'm really excited about this bill.
Yeah, and hopefully it goes through. Hopefully this guy is right, and we don't have any trouble, and we'll keep you up to date on that. Coffee, Health, and Science podcast listener, because this is important stuff if you're like me or Dr. Coffee. Yeah. So Let's move on to the next new article, though. I wanted to run this one by you first, Dr. Coffee, and I know you have a couple you're going to share with me. But I saw on CBS News, now this is getting mainstream, an article titled, "New Research Suggests Drinking Coffee Can Help Make Bones Stronger." And I know the research that they're referring to isn't brand new. I think it's from like late 2019. But it's just now making mainstream news, and CBS was interested enough to report on it. And they reported that this study covered 564 people who drank a lot of coffee, and they had a higher bone mineral density than non-coffee drinkers. And looking at the study, Dr. Steve, I remember the episode we did together talking about the many good compounds in coffee. I see a couple of notable characters in this study. Trigonelline made the list for a metabolite that was positively correlated with higher BMD. Also, the quinate that you talked about, and the third one. Let me take a crack at this: 3-hydroxy. There you go. 3-hydroxypyridine sulfate is the third metabolite. So, what do you think about this, Dr. Steve? Better bones with coffee?
So again, people get really mixed up. They think that bone softening, osteopenia, osteoporosis is all related to calcium, and it's not. So the way bone works is it's like coral in the ocean. So you've got this framework, which is hydroxyapatite, and that's where the calcium sits in. Those are the shelves. I'm trying to make it simple. It's really pretty technical scientifically, but simply put, what coffee does is it helps strengthen that shelf structure for the calcium. Does that make sense to you?
To better hold the calcium, sort of thing.
Exactly, and you know, that's really what we want to do to increase bone strength as people get older. So coffee's got a real good gig there.
Yeah, no kidding. Positive effect with 3 recognizable characters. I wonder how much is because of, you know, kind of an entourage effect. Like you said, it's a combination of these things. And like you've said on previous episodes, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. So I wonder how much of the bone effects are from a kind of entourage effect of all these things, you know?
So we know that coffee is a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful antioxidant. And the whole oxidative stress on bone structure is part of the problem that people are having with regard to bone loss. So yes, it is multiple things that are, you know,
working together. Yeah. Synergizing, I feel.
Exactly.
Yeah. Before we jump off of this topic, I wanted to run something by you. You know, this article mentions that previously coffee has shown to be bad for bone health. I know there's a lot of bogus research from the past, but one study showed caffeine reducing calcium absorption and inhibiting bone formation, and caffeine being linked to increased blood pressure. Do you think that this was one of those old lesson-formed studies? Do you think they were studying caffeine alone? What do you think?
Yeah, they were studying caffeine alone as part of the problem.
I see.
And, you know, you and I should revisit both bone loss and blood pressure together. We can pull out the archives and do it over again.
Yeah. No, I feel those are 2 topics we could go deeper into. That's a good idea.
Yeah, so caffeine and coffee are not the same thing.
Right.
There's a big difference between different types of caffeine, and there's a synergistic effect when coffee and caffeine work together when you drink them versus when you take a Red Bull,
right?
And it's got all this added caffeine to it, and that increases blood pressure. It does cause stomach problems, and it does lead to insomnia.
Right.
But when you have coffee that is roasted properly, like a purity coffee. It's lower in acid. For most people, it does not raise blood pressure. And for most people, it does not cause stomach problems.
Right.
People that are sensitive to caffeine are going to have insomnia if they drink caffeine too late in the day, no matter what the source is.
Right.
Which is why, we still recommend people use L-theanine. The brand I like is Sun-theanine. But theanine is a amino acid that helps with the way we use caffeine.
Nice. Yeah, you can go back to our caffeine sensitivity episode, a really eye-opening episode, Dr. Steve, where you talk about that, among other things. So I'm glad you touched on that. The Red Bull and the no-dose, not the same as a high-quality organic coffee.
Correct.
Yeah, exactly. The next one here, Dr. Steve, got a good article about climate change and how it's affecting coffee production. This one's a little bit spooky. I know that you are up on this sort of thing, Dr. Steve, so I wanted to bring it up on the show. It makes sense, climate change, temperatures rising, droughts increasing, pest issues also playing into climate change. The problem is apparently that there is going to be a loss of coffee land. There is an ongoing loss of coffee or land, rather. And one study estimates that by 2050, we're going to lose between 43% and 58% of Arabica land, depending on how well we do with our emissions cuts. So a 43% reduction in coffee land by 2050 is kind of the best case scenario with dramatic emissions cuts. And if we don't do anything, it's going to be almost up to 60% loss of coffee land, which obviously worries me. People are drinking more and more coffee, tons of people drinking it. Less coffee land, raising prices, going to put stress on farmers. This is kind of worrying, is it not, Dr. Steve?
So, on a podcast, you're not supposed to say things that turn your listeners off.
Right.
but I'm going to this time.
Go ahead.
If any of your listeners are out there and they're still on the fence as to whether or not climate change really exists, they need to take a lot of coffee and drink it, or use it as an enema, coffee enema, because they need to get their brain out of climate change is existing.
Mm-hmm.
Microclimates impact coffee. We know that Jamaican Blue Mountain can't be grown in West Virginia.
Right, good point.
We know that Kona needs that volcanic ash and can't be grown in West Virginia.
Right.
When climate impacts the microclimates, when climate change impacts the microclimates where coffee is grown, we are going to start losing our ability to grow that coffee.
Oh, man.
And when again, we've always said the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. So when you add to that changes in rainfall,
right,
changes in pressure, changes in heat. So we've had, a 2.5 degree increase in temperature for the month of January worldwide. I mean, this is going to definitely affect our ability to grow coffee. And I think that the latest is about a 60% loss of coffee climates by the year 2050. And I don't believe them when they say by the year 2050.
Right.
I think it's coming much quicker than they even can get their arms around, because as climate change occurs, it's a snowball rolling down the hill. So it picks up on all the other things that are happening. This ice mass in Antarctica, the size of Washington, D.C., broke off last week. You don't think when that moves out and melts, it was 68 degrees in like the Arctic Circle or something? You don't think when that breaks off and melts, it's not going to start affecting our ability to grow coffee?
Right.
Of course it is.
Yikes, man.
We're in deep doo-doo, and it's not just coffee that's affected. So, write your Congress.
Yeah, definitely. But it is interesting that you point out such a delicate plant, right? There are some plants that are grown in all sorts of different climates, you know what I mean? But we're so obsessed with this coffee bean and we rely on it so much, and it really is a delicate plant depending on the cultivar and depending on the environment. You might be paying a lot more for coffee when 2050 or sooner comes around. You know what I mean?
Yeah, as an American, I don't know if people understand. We drink 66 billion cups of coffee every year.
Jesus, that's crazy. Just Americans, 66 billion cups.
I know that's more than Bloomberg has in dollars.
Oh my God, you're hilarious, Dr. Steve.
Yeah, we may not care much about our beaches and oceans. We may not care much about our beef and hamburgers, but you take away our coffee because of climate change.
Now we're pissed.
we're going to be really pissed. That's right.
That's exactly right.
Coffee is grown in tropical type climates for the most part, and our tropical climates are changing. They're changing because of sea level rising, temperatures rising. In Kenya right now, I think it's Kenya, there's a blight of locusts, or Ethiopia. Really? Yeah, maybe it was Ethiopia. A blight of locusts like they haven't seen in a long time.
Oh, jeez.
So we're in deep doo-doo. And if we want our coffee, we've got to start knocking on some Congress and Senate doors telling them to work hard on climate change.
Yeah, you're right. It's time that we wake up, and if you want to enjoy your coffee for the future, then start thinking about this stuff for sure. So I thought that was an interesting piece showing how climate change is affecting the coffee trade, coffee growers, everything that's in the industry of coffee. We'll keep an eye on that, Dr. Steve. I'm sure we'll hear more from you. Let's switch it to a more optimistic story here. I've got a great one to counter that last post, and this is a happier story because, Dr. Steve, you take a look at modern America, the American machine, and, industry, and a lot of this climate change, that's where we're pointing the finger. We're pointing the finger at the biggest guys who are producing the most waste, who are creating the most pollution. Well, some of these companies, some of these organizations are getting a little creative with their waste. Ford is turning coffee waste into car parts. This is from thehill.com. Ford is partnering with McDonald's to turn their leftover coffee into lighter and more sustainable car parts. I guess that coffee waste can be used for headlamp housing in some cars. So it's not exactly a whole coffee car, but they're taking this waste, they're converting it into a piece that they're very in need of. It's very useful. And here we go, repurposing that coffee waste into car parts. What do you think, Dr. Steve?
So it was very interesting because Ford had an announcement in December that they're going to be partnering with McDonald's to use the dried skin of the coffee bean, which comes off during the roasting process, to repurpose it to, as you said, car parts. It's nice because it's not just being wasted. It's going into make a car lighter, which means that for every 20% decrease in weight, there's 25% savings in energy.
Fuel efficiency, right. That's a good point.
So it's really nice that they're starting to do that. Bamboo is something that your listeners can get their arms around. We know that bamboo gets repurposed for lots and lots of things, everything from bamboo toothbrushes to bamboo tables and bamboo bed sheets.
Right.
And the reason that I'm bringing up bamboo is we've repurposed an agricultural product so that we can use it to help us in an efficient way. Well, coffee is the same thing. 66 billion cups a year. That's a lot of beans.
Right.
And so what happens to the beans? Well, up till now, McDonald's throws the skin away. It goes into either recycling or it goes into the trash. So they now have a program with Ford where they're going to be making certain vehicle parts. And they do this by turning it into a pellet.
Oh.
So they mix it with some plastic. They turn it into a pellet, and then they can mold it to go into different shapes.
So it's like a bean skin that gets turned into pellets and then kind of emulsified with plastics.
Yep.
That's crazy, man. Who thought of that? Who thought of that? That would make a good headlight. Yeah, that's the craziest thing. I think that wet coffee grounds is about the last thing that I would think would make a good headlight. But I guess there's someone smarter than me working on this, man. Yeah, that's really cool. And like I said, I think we can all do our part to change our own lifestyles. But I like to see the big guys, thinking outside of the box, saying, what can we do to, not have so much waste and make a difference here when it comes to fuel efficiency and conservation?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I guess you were talking about headlights. So they usually make them out of plastic talc, and talc is not sustainable.
Right.
So being able to use a renewable product like coffee skin, bean skin, that's great.
That's crazy, man. That's so crazy. Very interesting article, Dr. Steve. I was glad that you took a shine to this. So that's all for my articles, Dr. Steve.
I'll bring you up on a couple of things happening in my life, which some of your listeners might find interesting.
Oh, please, let's do it.
So I had given out a small bag of Purity to one of our doctors, and he said, well, I quit drinking coffee.
Uh-huh.
I said, why? And he said, well, it stains my teeth.
Uh-huh.
So I said, well, the amount of antioxidants in coffee you definitely want. So let's talk about how you can avoid tooth discoloration.
Yeah, perfect.
So you make a paste with some baking soda, or you go buy Arm & Hammer, their Advanced White, or Crest 3D Whitening. So what we've done is we've stained up things with coffee and then taken baking soda or these other two products, and we tried brushing the stain out. And they worked.
You're doing experiments on coffee stains?
Of course.
That's awesome.
Got to figure out how to get people to drink coffee. And if one of our doctors is going to say, I'm not drinking it because of the stain, we got to figure out how to get past that, right?
Professor Coffee. I love it.
So we found a couple of things. We found that an electric toothbrush works much better than a manual toothbrush for getting the stain out. And we also found that, and I'm not a big straw fanatic. I don't really like drinking from a straw.
Coffee through a straw.
But if you're going to drink cold coffee and you drink it from a straw, then it doesn't sit on the teeth.
That's a good point.
And the other thing that your listeners are going to be surprised at is that because of the acid in coffee, you don't want to brush your teeth right after drinking it, because that will erode enamel.
Interesting. Because you're kind of wiping the coffee all over the enamel?
Well, it's acid, so it'll soften that enamel.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're brushing right until saliva has changed the pH back again.
I see. Okay.
Then you're going to erode the enamel. The same thing with the fact that coffee can cause bacteria to grow in your mouth.
Right.
Which can lead to enamel erosion. So you want to rinse out your mouth maybe scrape your tongue, but you wait until you don't brush your teeth exactly right after you drink a cup.
That makes sense too, because I know there's like gum disease benefits and all this stuff. You probably want the CGAs and the lipids and everything to do their work in your mouth, much like you don't drink water right after brushing your teeth.
Exactly.
Yeah. See, I listen,
Yeah.
Dr. Coffee. I learned some things.
So I thought that was an interesting thing that happened. Another interesting thing that happened was I had a patient give us a call and say that he was told he's not allowed to drink coffee because he has gout.
Ooh, interesting. Oh, tell me your thoughts on this. Now, my understanding is that gout, you wanted to cut out things like red meat and stuff like that.
Yeah, so I told him to find another doctor. And we know that there are specific foods or supplements that can help with gout. They would include coffee. So there's research that suggests that drinking coffee in moderation, especially regular caffeinated coffee, low acid like a purity coffee, may be associated with reducing the risk of gout.
Nice. Reducing the risk of developing it?
Yep.
Okay. Like that?
Or of having a gout attack.
Ah, of even having a flare-up. Interesting. Yeah, because I know it's one of those things that kind of flares up in people.
Yep.
Yeah, interesting.
And we know that eating cherries will reduce the risk of gout.
Oh, interesting. Coffee's a cherry.
It is.
Yeah.
So there you have it.
Interesting.
And we know that vitamin C will reduce the risk of having a gout attack.
Mm-hmm.
We know staying away from sugary foods and beverages and alcohol.
I didn't know sugar contributed.
Yeah.
No, man. Sugar contributes to everything bad. What's up with that?
It is. It's just a poison. You know, put an assembly line up with food, have God at one end, have Coca-Cola at the other end. And you should only eat from the end closer to God. The less refined, the less purified.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Of course, God is standing at the end drinking his cup of coffee, so it's good.
Yeah, buddy. Absolutely right. All right, Dr. Steve, thanks for the recent news. We always appreciate following you around, all your exploits, and also for the coffee news. I look forward to doing another one of these ASAP because my inbox keeps blowing up with coffee news.
There you have it. I look forward to it.
Everyone listening, thank you so much for tuning in today. Make sure you're subscribed, give us a rating and review, and share the show. We do appreciate that. This is Dr. Coffee and Jordan River, signing off, wishing you an extraordinary day. We'll see you next time on the Coffee, Health, and Science Podcast. Bye-bye.